check this out too. I've been to the Blue Jam Cafe on Ventura a bunch of times.
Oh,
I
okay.
stayed at the Tarzana Inn. It's one of my favorites. It's a little dive, little spot, but it's nice. It's quaint.
Well,
Yeah, and I've been up and down Ventura, passing the law firm so many times. It's crazy.
well, believe it or not, I've actually never been in the Blue Jam Cafe.
You got to, man. You got to. Those pancakes, dude, and it's always packed
Oh,
too.
well, we used to be, but yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Those
yeah,
were the days.
it was. Yeah, I would see people like lines and stuff come out, and I go to Mel's Diner, which is just like maybe a block closer. And then I was at Marmalade Cafe, which is about a block from Mel's, and because my firm, arranges a lot of stuff there, and I was eating with one of the partners, and they were looking across the street at Blue Jam Cafe, like, oh, I should go there sometime, and this
Yeah, it's
hasn't
one of our.
happened.
Every time we go to Cali, we have to stop at Blue Jam Cafe, and I really like that one on Ventura. There's one in Santa Monica that I've never been to, but it looks kind of more snooty than the one in on
Oh,
Ventura.
yeah, you could walk to this one from my place because
Right.
I'm right on.
You're in Sherman Oaks, right?
I'm in Sherman Oaks, and if you were to Google the Gelsons in Sherman Oaks on Van Nuys Boulevard, I am like a block and a half from that Gelsons. It's
That's
like an
crazy.
8-minute walk. Yeah,
I appreciate the hat, by the way. Where are you? Where were you born? I just saw it on Facebook, but
South Bend, Indiana.
South Bend, Indiana. You went to Notre Dame.
I went to Notre Dame. My dad taught there for 48 years.
I was gonna ask. I mean, you're kind of a Buttigieg, right? His dad taught at Notre Dame, right? He grew up in South Bend.
Yeah, it's funny because
Did you know him?
I did not. He was born when
Oh,
I was
right.
a senior in high school. So he's a lot younger than me.
You went to USCLA in what, like 88 or 87, something like that?
Yeah, so I went to Notre Dame from 82 to 86, and Pete was actually born in January of 82.
Right.
And so I was a senior in high school, but I heard the name Buttigieg
Oh, really?
through my mom, but she pronounced it Buttigieg.
Yeah.
So I guess she didn't know them very well, but I think she might have known the mother. Now my sister tells me that my dad actually knew them better.
Right.
It's funny because my dad's the one who taught at Notre Dame. My mom taught at St. Mary's, which is that's the all women's school
Mhm.
that affiliated with Notre Dame. It's basically across the street, or across the highway from it. And she also taught part-time at IUSB. She unfortunately passed away in 1988. I heard the name from my mom, but my sister told me that my dad knew them better because, of course, both of the Buttigieg parents were on Notre Dame faculty, but they didn't come to Notre Dame until 1980.
Right.
So
I read his book, and they're Maltese, and he was like some Gramscian scholar, and they had all these intellectuals at their house, and they were the dad and him, and obviously the whole family. But it started with the dad. They're hardcore Notre Dame fans. They would go to the games and all that stuff.
Yeah. That's how I grew up. I mean, I went to multiple Notre Dame games per year. My dad had season tickets, and we had a big family, so I didn't get to go to all the games.
Right.
But like the Southern Cal games, I went to most of those. The one big one I missed was what we call the green jersey game, and Notre Dame came out in green jerseys and slaughtered USC and ended up winning the national championship. But I went to one 4 years before that where we beat them and won the national championship. So I was spoiled. Ara Parsegian spoiled me, actually. He was the Notre Dame coach when I was a little kid.
Yeah, so. I mean, I feel like Notre Dame still has that name, but I remember growing up, maybe because I grew up in Chicago, Notre Dame had this, Rudy, obviously, but I had a girlfriend, a longtime girlfriend, and her dad, he went to good schools. He went to Eastern, and then I believe he went to Wharton Business School. And but he wanted to go to Notre Dame and couldn't afford it for undergrad. So when I met him, he was in his 50s, and he always had a Notre Dame sweatshirt. He never went, and he would just talk about like Notre Dame. Like there's so many people, especially of older generations. Like the goal was to go to Notre Dame, especially if you're from the Midwest, right?
Right. Well, that's how my dad really went there, I would think, because, my dad was from southwestern Ohio. And just to tell you how hick it was, um, the name of the town is spelled the same as Versailles, the big palace in France. But
Versailles, right? They say or something.
Versailles.
Oh, even worse.
Yeah, Versailles. That's
even worse.
Yeah, and his dad, my grandfather, was an alum of Ohio State, but I think it was his influence that got my dad to go to Notre Dame. And so he was class of 1953, classmate, by the way, of Regis Philbin.
Wow.
They were in the same class. They kind of knew each other, not well, but he knew my dad at least knew who Regis was.
But no, he had no impression of him, like at all. Like he didn't think he was going to be a big star.
He didn't know him well enough to really know,
right.
I don't think, but he did know who he was. It wasn't a complete stranger. And didn't really have anything bad to say about Regis.
Right.
Because you wonder about people like that sometimes, who they step on to get on top and what have you. But I never heard bad stories about Regis Philbin from my dad or anyone else. And my dad was going to he actually went to St. Louis U for medical school, but decided after a year that was his father's dream and not his dream. So he dropped out of medical school. And because he had thought about going into political science, but I think he had a scholarship to St. Louis U, and St. Louis was stronger in philosophy. So that's where my dad got his PhD, and that's what he ended up teaching.
Oh, he taught philosophy?
Philosophy.
What area? I mean, what was his bag?
It was really history and philosophy of science. So it kind of merged his science background from undergrad. He was a science pre-med major.
Yeah.
And so he wrote books on Darwin, and he wrote books on, a lot of stuff that went way over my head. Because I was never a big science guy.
Oh, really?
No. I barely. I mean, I did well in chemistry. Biology, I was not really up to snuff in, and I did okay. But I never really felt like that was my wheelhouse. And although I was good at math, although I would say later that I was really not as good in math and more good at arithmetic. So good with numbers. And algebra was okay. Geometry, I had to work really hard. And then trigonometry is where I completely fell off the truck. And just did not. And we had a bad teacher, and it was just not good. And that's where I kind of realized that my orient was more towards the arts and letters, which is funny because I never was like an avid reader.
Me neither.
Yeah.
Well, now I can kind of hear myself. Well, I just sometimes I don't hear myself. But go ahead.
Okay. Well, let me know if you need me to.
For sure. But what did you get a BA in Notre Dame at?
So it was they called it government. Now they call it political science. If I were to do it over again, I might have majored in history. My thinking at the time was I thought I knew more about history than I did about political science. So I thought to expand I would do the political science. And actually, I spent 1 year, sophomore year, again, this is early Reagan administration. So this is 1983, 84. This is Morning in America. And I'm thinking, what I really need to do is get a job because, we had a family of 7 kids, stretched on a father's salary. I mean, it ended up being the ticket to what I have now, but because of the educational doors it opened. But what we did not have was like spending money.
Right.
So it was, we're spread between 7 mouths, and so I thought,
But that's a good thing though, right? Because money usually people want money because they want opportunities, right? Money gives you opportunities. Right. So you guys didn't have the money because your dad's a professor. You guys are, and your mom's a teacher. but you guys have the opportunity. So it's like it kind of
Exactly.
works out. You kind of grew up not being a rich prick, right? And you
Right.
had the opportunities of a rich prick, right?
You could, like I say, I was spoiled more by the Notre Dame football coach than
Right.
anybody else. And I was, reasonable minds could differ on whether I was a prick, but I would definitely not see. Now people can debate whether or not I'm rich.
Yeah.
This background here, that's just my condo's swimming pool. But I live in a condo. I don't have a house even. I could afford one, but could I afford, would I be able to put up with the commute that I would need to have in
Right.
order to have a house? And I could have bought a house a few years ago. When I bought the condo, actually more than a few, it was 2001. But I kept getting out, the market was starting to rocket up, and I kept getting outbid for houses. So I
Right.
decided,
For my generation, I mean, we saw everybody like, we grew up. So a lot of generations grew up thinking, house, get a house, get a house. That's a secure way to wealth. And then my generation, I was born in '84, so 2007, 2008, 2009, we saw people who had houses lose their houses. All of a sudden,
yeah,
the bank told you you didn't own your house, or that this house that was worth $300,000 and you're rich, it's actually worth half that, and you're actually in the hole. You're going to sell it for less than you bought it for 20 years ago.
uh,
And so for my generation, that's why people they're talking about millennials like we're not homeowners. We don't really see the security in it that past generations have seen.
right. Well, I was lucky because I bought low. And although it's funny because at the time, there was somebody who kept telling me, "Oh, you're buying at the wrong time. It's peaking now." I'm like, I don't think so. I thought that it hit bottom maybe about within the last 5 years, and it was going up, but it turned out it still had a very long way to go. And I look on Zillow periodically to see how it's doing, and it peaked in the late aughts, or before, well, I guess '06, '07. Then it crashed, although I don't think that its bottom value was as low as the price that I paid for it.
Right.
So I never was in a position where I was underwater, but I'm
Yeah.
lucky that way.
Yeah.
And see, you being born in 1984, you would have been only 17 years old when I bought my condo. You're not going to be buying homes at age 17, so you
Right.
didn't have that opportunity.
Right.
I won the birth lottery because when I in the '80s, because when I finished at Notre Dame, I came out to UCLA, and I only applied to 5 law schools, and Notre Dame was actually not one of them. Part of it, I just figured I wanted to see another part of the country, but also the tuition break that I got from Notre Dame undergrad would not apply to law school. And Notre Dame, you talk about people not being able to afford it. At the time, the thing about Notre Dame, and I'm really not as familiar with how they are now, I think they may have changed, but in the '80s, Notre Dame tuition was not as high as those of a lot of other private schools, but Notre Dame was not as generous on financial aid. So what it really attracted were the white middle class people
Right.
who could afford the more reasonable tuition, but what it didn't get were the lower income people
Right.
who needed the financial aid. Now I think they've changed that now, and I think they're more generous with the financial aid, and it's become a more diverse school, and especially a lot more Latinos, as I understand, than there
Yeah.
were when I was there. We had a
Well, and it's you would think. I mean, Latino population in general is growing in the United States, and Notre Dame being the largest private Catholic university in the United States. Um, I went to DePaul, which is the largest,
oh
I believe,
yeah,
Jesuit school. And when I went there, undergrad tuition first year was off campus $20,000, and I mean that's probably doesn't compare to Notre Dame, but coming from a single parent background, working class, and right, financial aid doesn't give you as much if you go to private university. Like then I bounced around, I had a mid career crisis, right? Ended up at UIC. then financial aid it's a state school. Then financial aid gives you a lot of money, right? Because it's basically the government paying itself. And but I mean, you want to get into this Mary Kay Letourneau thing? Because I actually looked into it, and again, 96, 97. I'm how old, right? 12, 13. He's only a year or so older than me. The guy,
I think
Billy.
exactly your age.
Yeah, and
maybe.
Yeah, he was born in early '83, and I was born in November '84.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I was just watching I was cutting my hair, and I'm watching an Australian interview that she obviously, if anybody who doesn't know, listening to this, watching this, she died on the 6th of this month.
Yeah, this week.
She had colon cancer, bowel cancer.
I had no idea.
Yeah, me neither. Supposedly they had gotten divorced officially last year, and but he was at her side when she died, apparently.
Yes.
They have 2 kids. But so anybody who doesn't know, Mary Kay Letourneau, she's a teacher who got caught having sex with her 12-year-old student, 6th grade student, right?
Right.
And she had been his teacher when he was in 2nd grade. I did not know that.
Oh, I did not know that.
I did not know that. Check this out. Her dad was a hardcore bircher. They kicked him out of the John Birch Society for having too extreme views.
The son's dad or her dad?
No, her dad. Her dad was a Republican from California, a state senator, and then he was a U.S. representative. He was a congressman in the 70s.
Do you know what part of California? Because that sounds like Orange County.
Orange County, yeah. She was born in Newport Beach.
Because the Birchers in California were not as big of a, because I moved to California in 1986, so for law school. So the Birchers were not as prevalent, I don't think, as they were in the 60s and the 70s, but it was Orange County and it was San Diego County that were the real hot beds.
And their whole bag is, I mean, they're not known now, but they used to be a huge thing. That they're anti-communist, right? But then that slides into reactionary right-wing politics, right?
Yeah, I watched
racism, nativism.
Yes. Did you? Just watched the Hulu series called Mrs. America.
Yeah, with what's her name?
So
Cate Blanchett.
Cate Blanchett as Phyllis Schlafly.
Yeah.
I mean, if she does not win awards for that portrayal, there's something wrong.
And I like the girl who played what's that feminist?
Gloria Steinem, Rose Byrne, who I've seen them
right.
both things. Oh my God, they were.
She killed it. She killed it.
God, perfect. And it's funny because Rose Byrne always reminded me of some women lawyers who I've actually known. And of course, she played a young woman lawyer on the show Damages, where she was the co-star with Glenn Close. And so I always kind of tied her with that.
Right.
So for her to just waltz right in and just stoke up Gloria Steinem. And I know Gloria Steinem herself had some issues with the series. I don't think her issues were with Rose Byrne's portrayal. I think it was with Phyllis Schlafly's portrayal and what she thought was an overemphasis on Phyllis Schlafly's role. But then again, the series makes it clear that it was a fictionalized account. And
that's what people have to get, right? Like, it's fiction. People don't understand what the word fiction means anymore.
Well, it's not pure fiction. It's fictionalized. So it's based on real life. But for example, the character, and I'm spacing on the name of the actress, because she was the character who played the friend of Phyllis Schlafly's, who winds up, she's the one who goes to that Republican, well, it wasn't the Republican, it was the women's conference in Houston, that big pivotal conference.
Right.
She drives down there, but then she kind of gets disillusioned, and she gives a speech, and it goes horrendously.
I can't remember.
I got to find the name of the actress who played her. But that entire character, that was a fictional character. That character did not exist in real life. And it was a major character, and one of the episodes actually really focuses on her. And I'm assuming that they just kind of use her as a vessel for someone who is like completely with Phyllis Schlafly, but then starts to have second thoughts about the Phyllis Schlafly movement. But Phyllis Schlafly was a Bircher. That's how I got off on this tangent. And they didn't really play up the Phyllis Schlafly racism in this.
No,
They played.
She seems, the way they portray it, that she's a very honest, forthright, just conservative woman, housewife.
Right. Who is like probably, racist in the more generic sense.
Right. Naively racist.
Yeah, and racist of her time. I mean, look, most white people are racist. I mean, that is a fact.
And then, especially in the 70s, we're not talking about 2020.
And she was born in 1924, so it's even more so in the 40s and the 50s.
Right.
And she grew up in the St. Louis area. Missouri was a slave state. Illinois wasn't. But she was from that general area. And I've been in Southern Illinois because my sister actually worked at Southern Illinois University for 5 years.
My girlfriend went there, yeah. Anybody who doesn't know, Chicago is one thing, and then, just the collar counties and south, you're basically in the south. You're basically in Kentucky or Tennessee.
Well, in fact, Illinois almost borders on Tennessee. So when my sister lived in Carbondale, Carbondale is closer to Memphis than it is to Chicago.
Yeah.
So
Little Egypt, they call it down there, right? Because of Cairo and all that stuff.
Cairo, don't they pronounce it Cairo?
When I read Cairo, I'm going to read it Cairo. I don't care how the locals pronounce it.
Well,
Versailles, I'm not saying Versailles. I'm sorry.
Well, like your state,
Nevada.
They call it Nevada, but it's Nevada. Come on. I mean, that should be the pronunciation. But
and you can't say that. You can't say Nevada. They can't. They don't. It's a faux pas to pronounce the name properly. It's a Spanish word.
Yes. I mean, it's Spanish. People are like, well, no, it's Nevada. Like, well, where did you get the word? Maybe you should adhere to the language from which the word came.
You could take the land, but, to say that this word now means it's now pronounced differently, that's a whole nother level of conquest.
Yes, exactly. It's like language appropriation or something. Well, you'll come up with a better word for it than I have, but that is what it is.
Yeah.
So
we were talking about Mary Kay Letourneau. So yeah, her dad. And then check this out.
Yeah.
He was running again he wanted to revamp his career. He was a professor at Santa Ana College. Mm-hmm. This is in '82.
And Santa Ana College, that I'm not familiar with it, but I'm guessing it's a junior college.
Yeah, me neither. And he had an affair with one of his students there and had an out-of-wedlock child and ruined his political career.
Yeah, that would ruin it in Orange County. Absolutely.
Right. But this is Mary Kay Letourneau's dad we're talking about. Also, when she was 11 and her brother were swimming in the pool, he drowned and died. She was in the pool with him. He was 3, she was 11. She was raised in a conservative right-wing Catholic family. She went to an all-girls high school. Catholic high school.
The brother died?
The 3-year-old brother died. And she was in the pool there, but she says she didn't notice. And so I'm watching this Australian interview. This was it was recorded maybe two years ago, because he said he was 35 and he's only a year older than me. I'm 35 now, so it had to be a year or two ago.
It's coincidental. Mary Kay Letourneau was a year older than me, so it's like the parallel.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And so
if I were a teacher and I had preyed on you, of course that would have been the scandal. That would have been the scandal of the century if that had happened.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the details of the case, right? Because people, I mean, it shocks me when you go back to the story. Excuse me?
I want to get back to the drowning after we do that, but just.
Oh no! What did you want to say about that?
Oh, I was asking you about it because I don't know about it. The drowning.
Oh yeah, she was 11 and she was with a friend in a pool, and her 3-year-old brother was there, and I guess he wasn't watching. She wasn't watching him, and he drowned. And they were the only 3 people there: her, the friend, and the brother. So imagine what that does to you at 11, right? But anyways, so she was his 2nd grade teacher.
My goodness.
And then, 6th grade comes around, and then he's teaching 6th grade. And then I guess they went to some summer. Vilau, who's Samoan American, he comes from a broken home. He has 17 his dad married 5 times. He has 17 siblings, broken home.
17.
Yeah. He tells this story in the Australian interview that, or she tells it. Oh, I knew him in second grade. I knew his name. Obviously, he was my student, and he used to hide in the closet. And she goes, and she's very proud and giggly, right? Now she's 50-something in the interview.
Yeah.
And she goes, tell him what she used to do in the closet. And he goes, yeah, we were hiding in there so that we could, and then he gets embarrassed. And she goes, they were hiding in there. He told me that they were hiding in there and waiting for me to pass so they can look up my skirt. She giggles about it. These are second graders, right? And this is the person you end up marrying for 14 years.
Wow.
So she starts dating him. Supposedly she had been abused by her husband. They had lived in Anchorage. They had lived in Seattle. And this all takes place in Washington.
Right.
And so, her marriage is on the rock. She has 4 kids already, right? When she starts dating this guy. And she says that he seduced her. And that he was the pursuer, and that she kept telling him to get away. So the police come. There, somebody calls saying that there's a drunk driver in some marina parking lot or something like that. So the police come. They find she gets out of the van. She has only a long T-shirt on. They don't know if she has anything underneath. And the Villies in the back seat, and they take them all to jail. And they call the mom and they say, what they call Villy's mom. What do you want us to do? Oh, that's her teacher. You can just give her, let him go with her. She didn't know that the mom didn't know the details. She says now, like, if I had known what was going on, it wouldn't have happened. So a year goes by. She's found half naked in a van with her 12-year-old student. Nothing happens. Year goes by, and then some tip. They end up arresting her, yada yada yada. She gives birth. They were going to throw 6.5 years at her, and she pleads it down to 6 months, 3 months suspended. And while she's waiting for sentencing, she gives birth to the first kid.
Right.
And she's pleading like it'll never happen again. Yada yada yada. She goes to prison for 3 months. She comes out. She's ordered to stay away from her kids, the kids she has with Villy, and from Villy, all minors. But as soon as she comes out in January of, I believe, 98, she meets up with him right away.
Wow.
And arrested a month later in February of 98, and goes back to the same judge who ordered her to stay away, and they give her 7.5 years. 7.5 years. And while she's in prison,
6 or 5, something like that.
Yeah, she goes to prison from 98 to 04.
Okay, so 6 years.
Right. In prison, she has the October of 98. While she's in prison, she gives birth to the second kid that she conceived in that January of 98. Yeah. Right.
Didn't waste any time.
Yeah, and but to this day, even in the Australian interview, she's like, I didn't know it was a crime. I shouldn't have gone to jail. What I did was not a crime. He was 12, but he was mature for his age. He was in charge. I wasn't in charge. Like, she's, it's crazy. But then you read about her past, her family. One of her brothers is a foreign relations advisor for Trump.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and her other brother was Solicitor General for the Department of Defense under George W. Bush. So I mean, there's some. She has some repressed emotions, to say the least. Some suppressed stuff.
It's one thing to say you don't think it's wrong if you grew up in some hippy dippy family where you're all living on a commune and
right.
knows. But it's even less persuasive when you're coming from some you have right-wing bona fides from the Bircher father to now the Bushy and Trumpy, siblings. That I'm not buying. The only part of that rings true at all, just in terms of her account, is that Villy, is that his name?
Villy, yeah, Villy.
Villy was the pursuer. Not that he obviously didn't force himself, because she's old enough to be a willing participant. I can certainly buy the part. I'm not saying it's true or not, but it doesn't ring inherently false that he would have been the pursuer, because that rings true for like kids, boys of that age. I
I
could
remember
see
being in middle
them
school, having a
pursuing.
crush on my teacher and saying inappropriate things to her, right? You know, you have a crush on the teacher and you're like,
And that's why, I mean, society, yeah, they though they say my internet connection is unstable. That sucks. Um, but they say that, I mean, but society would be much more harsh. Again, the hypothetical, if I were pursuing you at that time, at a year apart,
right,
that would have been very much frowned upon, because the men are considered to be the ones who are in control.
right.
So, in fact, for years, homosexuality was conflated with pedophilia.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, if you called a man a homosexual, the implication was that he was a pedophile and that he was doing it with kids. And if you go and look at these 1950s films on, the homosexual menace, that was the theme of it. That it was, and of course, we know that they're not the same.
Right.
But men going after, whether it's girls or boys, and a
Right.
lot of them, even the ones that go after the boys, they're actually heterosexuals, and they go with the prepubescent boys because, well, you can do the math on that.
Right. Right.
But she had to have known that it was wrong, and I mean, and it was wrong, and so it's interesting though. 1998 was actually the year that I met her attorney. Of course, at the time, I don't think she was her attorney. The attorney's name is Ann Bremner. And I met her because I worked with her on a case. This was a case for a client that's based down here in Los Angeles. And it's a nursing staffing company. And they were being sued up in Seattle. And our firm was actually going to try the case, and we had local counsel up there. But then the head of the company was up in Seattle out at a bar and met Ann at this restaurant. They were out taking a smoke break. And he was so enchanted with her that he decided to fire the local counsel and make her the trial attorney. So, and I'm not a trial attorney even now. I mostly do appellate work and motion work. So I was basically there as support for her. And then one of her partners, they co-tried the case. And they did win the case, but that was, how I knew Ann. And I had not spoken with Ann in 22 years until just a couple of months ago. We had some Zoom conference. And the subject, interestingly enough, was how to handle big media cases. and she's had some experience with that.
Right.
And
Right.
Letourneau is probably her most famous client. And and Ann has been on like MSNBC.
I was gonna say, has she had any other clients that we would know?
I couldn't rattle them off the top of my
Right.
head. I think she's had some, but she's she's a media savvy attorney, and so this was the whole theme of the discussion. And I mainly participated because I knew her, and I just thought it'd be interesting to connect with her. So, and she briefly mentioned Mary Kay, and no hint of any life-ending illness. I don't know if Ann even knew at the time. And so, so I knew Ann before the Letourneau case because I think Ann became her attorney, I think, on the back end of the prison sentence, because there was some civil litigation that grew out of it. Ann was a former prosecutor, but then she became a defense. So she would do criminal defense and civil litigation in private practice. So that's where Mary Kay would have become her client, if I remember correctly. So that's
and
just
the whole thing. I mean, yeah, there's the gender thing. Me and my wife have been talking about it since I was talking to you online about it. We talked about it today. That it is different. If it was a girl and the teacher was a man, I mean, it wouldn't even be controversial. He would be under a prison, right? He wouldn't even be in prison.
right.
But there's also, you got to, I mean, and I'm not that, I don't, identity politics, make me, whatever. But if the boy was white I mean, you
Yeah.
wouldn't. It wouldn't have been controversial either, right? It would have been purely, rape. But that he was this dark kid, right? And she says it in the Australian interview. Like, there's kid. He's like, he's not a kid. There's teenagers that go to prison that are tried on murder and they're teenagers. But what she's failing to mention about that is that they're usually black and brown kids. If
Right.
you're a white kid, they're not going to charge you 15 years old for murder.
Oh, he just needs some,
Right.
coaching up or something.
And so there's this idea that black and brown boys become men at 10, whereas white boys become men at 18 or 20, and that's racism or whatever. That's our fucked up teaching and training about race, right? And she, in the interview, again, this is 2 years ago, she's 50 something. She's like, I still don't think what I did was not only not wrong, but shouldn't be illegal. And it's pretty crazy that people, I mean, that's the problem with the country right now, right? People are seeing nobody's on the same page when it comes to basic principles, basic justice, what is right, what is wrong, what is moral, what is not. And I mean, I'm excited that you're a lawyer, because, like, what I wanted to ask you, and the other thing in small world, this week, I promise you, me and my wife were talking, and I've decided to go become a certified paralegal.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, UNLV has I have a bachelor's, so all you have to do is get certified, I believe.
I think so.
Yeah. So they have a
state is different, but I would assume that
Oh,
would be
okay.
the case. Because I worked with. I mean, I've obviously worked with a lot of paralegals, but I was
Explain what a paralegal does. I mean, I kind of know what it does, and
it can be a wide range. I mean, paralegals, there are some law offices where the paralegal is almost practicing law, which
right.
but
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
some where that's pretty much the way it's happening. And there are other ones where they're basically glorified secretaries.
Right.
And, I've been at the same firm for 23 of the last 28 years. I took a 5-year gap from 2012 to 2017, and I was with a much smaller firm at that time. And I worked with a paralegal there who had just gotten his certification from a paralegal program at UCLA, and he had already had his undergraduate degree. So as I recall, and of course, this is California standards. Nevada might be different, but
Right.
California, I think he just took a course to get certified, and in California, you can work as a paralegal without being certified. But if you're, and again, some states it may not be the same, but I think it helps you get jobs if you're certified.
Yeah, right, exactly. Who's going to go to uncertified paralegal?
I mean, it depends.
In a pinch?
Yeah, you might. I mean, there might be some people who are eminently qualified to do it. Especially depending on what your undergraduate degree was. And didn't you do like some engineering or science thing?
No, I did accounting, and then I graduated with history.
It's funny because there was one semester, there was the thought I hadn't finished earlier where I was getting not upset, kind of paranoid about my money-making abilities coming out of school. I actually was an accounting major for one semester. It was a detour, second semester sophomore year. I quickly realized, because I just thought, I'm good with numbers. My grandmother on my dad's side had some business accounting experience, and I thought, this is probably in my blood. I quickly realized that I was, the accounting class was 4 days a week at 8 a.m. and I was not doing well in it. And I just realized, no, this is not for me. So I went back to the arts and letters program. So it's interesting that we both have that in common too.
Yeah, I mean, I've told the story before, but yeah, I went to DePaul. I wanted to be a psych. I did AP Psych, and I'm like, okay, I'll be a psychologist.
Well, I have a brother who is a psychologist.
Oh yeah?
And another one who has a master's in psychology, but he ended up going into journalism. In fact, that brother lives in Chicago, like a block or two probably from when you were going to school at UIC, because he lives in that neighborhood, Pilsen, I guess, or Little Italy.
Yeah, literally. I have a sister-in-law who's about to graduate from Illinois Wesleyan. Shout out to Daisy. She's about to graduate with a psych degree, and she's going to go back to grad school. But she kind of like with my history degree, she doesn't know what to do with it, right?
Right.
I told this story that I went to DePaul wanting to be psych, and my mom, my grandma being an immigrant, and my mom's an immigrant, but my grandma's the matriarch of the family. She said, all I want you to do is be either a doctor, a lawyer, some kind of businessman. I don't care what you do. I just want you to have a job that you have to wear a suit and tie and carry a briefcase. That's all her instructions to me were.
Where did she immigrate from?
Honduras.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and my dad's from Puerto Rico. Well, he's born here, but my grandpa's from Puerto Rico. That side is from Puerto Rico. And then I did accounting. I got to DePaul, orientation, right? Registration, and I took all the placement tests, and they're like, "You're really good at math." It fucking surprised me. You should be in the honors accounting program, and I'm 18. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I don't, and this is DePaul, and I'm like, okay, you're telling me I should do this, I'll do it. I did it for 2 years, had an accounting job at Dell. They actually told me to drop out of DePaul. They're like, we'll give you a job here. Starting pay was more than anybody in my family made. But, there was this room called the Beehive where there's just all these cubicles, and they called it the Beehive. And I was just like, and meanwhile at DePaul, any elective I get, I'm taking history. I'm taking social sciences, right? I'm taking arts and letters. And I'm like, and then I'm like, I don't want to do accounting. And I kind of went to community college, which was great.
Yes.
To kind of get your footing for cheap.
Yeah.
And I was a server, and one of my tables, an elderly gentleman, he's like, I'm an accountant. I chatted up all my tables, and this elderly gentleman with his wife, they're like, what are you studying? The wife's asking me, and I'm like, I was studying accounting, but now I don't know what I want to do. I maybe want to do history. And the man's eyes light up. He goes, I was an accountant for like 20, 30 years. And when I was in my late 40s, I quit accounting, went to school, got a degree in history, and now I'm a history teacher.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, I don't believe in God. But I believe that the universe talks to you if you're listening.
Yes.
The universe talks to you.
Yes.
And so I was like, all right, well, somebody's nudging me that way, right? Something's nudging me that way. So that's that story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, but the accounting thing was like, right. Coming from a poor background, how am I going to make money? Forget what you're into, forget what your interests are, what your hobbies are. And it's tough. I have a 16-year-old stepdaughter now, and we're at that stage where it's like, okay, who are you going to be? But we don't want to put that pressure on her, but there's that pressure on her, right?
Yeah. Oh, God. First of all, I don't envy anybody who's a parent right now. I don't envy anyone.
I feel sorry for them, man. They're missing out. She's going to be a junior now, so she's missing out in the prime time of her young education, right? Her youth education.
Junior in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It would have been. I could have
imagine
out a couple of those years actually, but the college was. I would have really, because I know the people in college who are missing out on it, and that's tragic. Not to mention a financial fiasco.
Harvard's going online for the whole next year, and they're still keeping their tuition at $46,000.
No, they are. Well, so University of Southern California has the bad and then the good news. The bad news is that they're going to virtual classes, at least for the fall. They've actually increased their tuition. So that part's bad. But, the Trump administration, of course, wants to, you probably know more about this than me. I'm going to not articulate this right, but they want to basically, with the immigrant students.
Oh, right.
They want to basically deport them if they're not going to active class.
Which makes no sense, right? Am I right? I mean, you're just being an asshole?
Yeah.
They're students anyway. It doesn't matter if they're online or going to campus. They're students.
So you know what USC is doing, and I'm a Notre Dame and UCLA guy. So USC, or Southern Cal, as they used to hate to be called, has two strikes against it in my book, but I give them credit where credit is due. And on the plus side, USC has announced that they are going to allow the foreign students to live on campus and to I don't know all the details, but basically what USC is going to do is basically throw a cock block at the Trump administration in terms of getting these people deported and allow them to stay in the country. And
Right.
in USC, USC is a funny school because it's it's often been called the University of Spoiled Children, and it's had its share of John Birchers come through it and come out of it. And the Nixon administration, of course, Nixon being from California, and you've probably seen Nixon with his V sign. And actually, this is the USC sign, the Fight On for Old SC sign.
Oh.
Yes, apparently that's where he got it.
Yeah, if you read Hunter S. Thompson, he says that Nixon was a huge football fan and knew everything.
Oh yeah, and he probably was a USC fan because Nixon being born in 1913, growing up in the 20s, USC was the school. I mean, UCLA was only founded in 1919. Was a little minnow in terms of being in the Pacific Coast conferences they had those days, and they took a while to even get close to USC's level. And even when I moved here, it was always USC's the football school, UCLA's the basketball school, which is an simplification, but that was how the media covered it, at least. But USC, there's like a lot of conservative elements there, but they're also very progressive in a lot of ways.
Right.
And the people who I know who went to USC largely are non-white.
Right.
So, and the other interesting.
Well, OJ famously went to USC, right? And you see that documentary, which is great. I love that documentary.
Which one?
It was a 30 for 30. I think it was like a 3-parter or 4-parter.
I saw the 30 for 30, and
they kind of show that that's USC is where he kind of got dazed by because they made him a superstar at USC, right?
Yeah. And it's funny because my first trip to California was in October 1981. I was a senior in high school. My dad and my mom had just separated, and I was living with my dad for 6 months. Well, it was not set to be 6 months. It ended up being 6 months.
Right.
I viewed it as punishment. But the reward I got was that my dad at Notre Dame has something that a lot of schools do not have. In addition to spring break, they have a fall break. There's a 1-week break, which they started doing it in the 1970s when the academic calendar was changing. And so my dad on his fall break had a conference in Los Angeles. And so I got to go with him to that conference. And I was, I might as well have been a stoner because that's about how closely I was paying attention to the impending college decision that I had to make.
Right.
And on this trip though, I visited both UCLA and USC. And I kind of assumed that, USC, wealthy private school, that's going to have basically every luxury you could want and every opportunity you could desire. And UCLA, it's going to be a public school. I'd only been to public schools up to that time my whole life. It'll be good and solid, but it would be unspectacular. And boy, I visited the campuses and it could not have been more different. I mean, UCLA is this absolutely gorgeous, idyllic campus in Westwood. One of the most beautiful settings you could ask for, and blew me away with the quality. And USC has a nice oasis campus in a very urban South Central Los Angeles neighborhood. The campus was nice enough, but at the admissions office, it seemed like half of what they wanted to talk about was football. And you made me think of it when you mentioned the OJ doc, because that's kind of what the air they gave off. Now USC did considerably, I think, upgrade their undergraduate standing starting in the early 1990s as Steve Sample was their president, and they they went up the rankings a lot because they were known as a school that had great, football, of course, but, film school, med school, law school, all the professional schools,
Right.
but a mediocre undergraduate institution. It's now a lot stronger as an undergraduate. And the other thing that I noticed when I was at UCLA Law School, and UCLA, was a way more diverse environment than Notre Dame. The black and brown students who I talked to, what they basically told me was that, UCLA did nothing to try to recruit them. They basically just kind of said, look, we know we're a great school. We're, top 15, top 20. You want to come here, great. If not, it's your loss. And USC, on the other hand, was hand over fist, making them offers and, free ride and all of that. Again, the opposite model of like Notre Dame in those days.
Right.
High tuition, but great breaks. And I never considered SC because it never occurred to me that I could get financial aid for it.
Right.
So
that's kind of how the situation in Chicago. Well, it used to be. UIC has been raising its tuition, so now they're saying it's basically a public school, but it's basically a private public school with the tuition, right? Because it's weeding out a lot of low income students. And
University of Southern California is?
No, UIC, University of Illinois Chicago.
Yes. Oh, wow. Oh,
and so for especially in the 90s and the 2000s when I went, that was the black and brown college, right? And then the white kids would go to Loyola or DePaul or U of C, University of Chicago. So it was just assumed, right? If if you can get into DePaul, which is the problem I faced, right? Because first year was $20,000 a year off campus, but then they're raising the tuition $2,000 every year, right?
Yeah.
And so even if you can get into, and that's the terrible thing, right? America is shooting itself in the foot, right? Like, because there's so many bright black and brown kids who just are shuffled away from the opportunities that would make them greater and thus the country because they can't afford it because there's no support to go there, right? And think of all that wasted human potential that we're not cultivating in this country because of racism and because of classism.
Yes. Yeah. No, we're completely, I'd say we're shooting ourselves between the eyes. Yeah. I mean, we're really missing out on so much.
And I appreciate you saying that, you had the birth lottery of timing of your generation because, people look at millennials and now I'm starting to look at Gen Z and say like, well, you guys should do more. When I was your age, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but when you were my age, the country was different. The environment was different. There were different opportunities for a kid like you. And those opportunities are gone, right? College is more expensive. Cost of living has gone up. Jobs, wages are stagnant, right? So...
Well, I had both. So I had a birth lottery in two different ways. One, the timing in terms of the 80s being really sort of the prime era, and also having, a father being a professor. I had no idea how lucky I was until later. But the timing too, because you talk about your tuition. So UCLA, 3 years of law school, first year as an out-of-state student. My annual tuition was about $5,600 a year.
And like, wait. In today's money, how much is that? Do you think? Would you say? It can't be more than 20,000, right?
No, I think it's less than that.
Yeah.
I think it's less than that.
But imagine that. Imagine that.
Well, hold on.
Well, you lived it. I have to imagine it.
Yeah. And people can't believe it because that was my first year when I was an out-of-state student. And one of the things that I was told was that you want to get residency. And at UCLA, it was very easy to get residency. All I had to do was I had to get a driver's license in California, register to vote. I did those within a week after I came out here. And then the only other thing, I had a summer job back in South Bend that first summer in 1987.
Right.
But I had my firm write them a letter telling them that I intended to stay in California. Now, I think they thought that I meant it. And I was basically, well, I don't really necessarily mean it, but I want to give myself the benefit of the doubt because...
You're going to be there anyway.
And it turns out that I have stayed, but I had no idea what I wanted to do then. But that was the only other thing that I had to do to confirm residency.
Right.
Once I did that, my second and third year tuition per year, $1,500 per year.
For law school. For law school. That's less than a
Law
car.
school.
Less than a car.
Less than a car. My summer in South Bend, my per week salary at that firm just for a summer job, I don't even remember the exact number, but it was somewhere between, it was like 750 to 800 something dollars a week. And then my second summer, I actually split it, which was a dumb idea, but again, something they allowed then because it was a student's market. And I split it between an LA firm called O'Melveny and Myers and a Chicago firm called Sidley and Austin, which, by the way, is where the Obamas met.
Oh.
I missed.
Yeah, he went to Occidental, right?
He went to Occidental for 2 years, and then he transferred to Columbia.
Right.
And he graduated, I think, in 1983. President Obama is 2 years older than me. Michelle Obama is 7 months younger than me. But Michelle, basically, I was born in 1963, but I didn't graduate high school until 1982 because my mom didn't think I was ready for kindergarten until I was 6. So I could have been class of 81, then 85, then 88. Instead, I was 82, 86, 89. Michelle was a year ahead of me despite being younger than me. So Michelle graduated law school in 88, and she was studying for the bar while I was a summer clerk at Sidley and Austin. So she started at Sidley that fall. Barack Obama started at Harvard Law School in the fall of 1988. And so he was a first year when I was a third year at UCLA. And his first year summer is when he went to Sidley and Austin. That's where he met Michelle Robinson, who then
and she was his boss, right? And
she was his
higher up.
A mentor, like a paired associate, I think is what they called it. And so that's what happened.
To this day, they say she's way smarter than him. She's the sharp one. She's the one who, But we live in a world where women can't be president, especially black women, and so. But she's kind of the brains of the operation. He's more the face and I heard even that his way of talking, his cadence, she learned that from him.
She learned that from him, or he learned that from
he learned that from her. Right.
Doesn't surprise me. It's funny because I thought he might have even been there when I was, and it turned out he wasn't. I just remember a skinny black kid in that summer class. I'm thinking, was that Barack Obama?
It might have been. It might have been.
It wasn't. He came a year later.
Oh, right.
But but for the grace of God, or accident of history, it could have been. Yeah. I mean, he's very smart in his own respect. And the other thing is, she is not. She has political gifts, but she has no desire to be a politician.
Right.
Because the Democrats would love nothing more than for her to.
Oh, you think she threw in her hat right now? She'd run away with it.
Yeah, even right now. And by right now, Joe Biden has mathematically clinched the nomination.
But we don't know what's going to happen in Milwaukee. Anything could happen in Milwaukee.
Anything could, in theory. But if she were to jump in, of course it would split the party and probably hand the election. Well, I don't think it would hand the election to Trump because I think that she'd trounce him. But the point being, she is such a rock star, and she's still young. Yeah. She's only 56
and vibrant and beautiful and smart and what did she do wrong? She's never done anything wrong. There's no controversy. Even after at the end of the presidency, her approval rating was at like 80-something%.
Right. No, it's. And look, Hillary Clinton's approval rating as a first lady was high too. First lady is kind of hard to. Can I curse?
Yeah.
It's hard to fuck up. Okay, it's a really hard job to fuck up. I think Melania, she's plagiarizing Michelle and doing some other things. But even Melania's approval, it's bad for a first lady. It's a lot better than her husband's, I think.
Right.
Michelle, though, it's hard to not like her. I think if you don't like, from our standpoint, I think we would quibble on, is she progressive enough? I think that would be the only real question that we would have about her. She's phenomenally smart, brilliant woman, and probably why she's doesn't want to be in politics, to be
Yeah.
honest.
I mean, it's a smart move, right? I mean, people always tell me, you should get into politics. I'm like, why do you hate me? Why do you hate me?
Well, it's funny because she has a lot in common with Hillary, but you know what she does not have that Hillary does have? That's the ego.
Yeah.
Hillary has the ego, and Hillary is kind of more ruthless than Michelle, I think.
But my wife says that, I voted for Jill Stein, or I wanted to. I voted for her in the primary last time around. And my wife was, excuse me?
Where were you living the last time? Were you in
Nevada? Well, I was living in, I took the primary in Illinois. We moved in 2016 in August. So I did the primary.
Okay.
And I wanted to vote for Jill Stein, but she got Jill Stein kicked off the ballot in Nevada. The Democrats did.
Wow.
But anyways, my wife says that
you're not going to pull a Mike Pence on us, are you,
mother? No. My wife will say, and a lot of women say, like, you have to be, if you're a woman in politics, you have to be ruthless, and that's what they actually admire about her, and that's why they like her. She's ruthless. We need somebody ruthless in there.
There's an extent to which that's true,
right?
Unfortunately.
Right. But then, they don't understand, like, well, these people, they don't understand, like, what she did in Honduras, what she did in the 90s to pass immigration, that she was behind the crime bill, how she slandered all of Bill Clinton's accusers, right? Kind of insinuating that they deserved it, that they were whores or whatever. But I wanted to, you are progressive. I mean, you seem to agree with a lot of the things I post.
Yeah.
But you're excuse me?
Over the years, I've become more progressive over the years. I would think 2008 was a big turning point for me, because I really that was when I started to see that, this capitalism thing is not all it's cracked up to be. And then I've become more, I've never been conservative, but I was kind of your typical white moderate Democrat.
Right.
Not a party guy so much.
I'm not a party guy.
I even voted for H.W. Bush in 1988. That's the only Republican I've ever voted for president. But,
yeah.
I just to tell you where I came from. I voted for Schwarzenegger for governor twice.
Yeah.
But I think that was probably the last time I voted for a Republican was Steve Cooley for Attorney General when he ran against Kamala Harris in 2010. But Steve Cooley was a client. So
there's obligatory. But speaking of clients, so you're a progressive, and that you've become more progressive over the years. I feel the same way. People say the older you get, the more conservative you get. But then if your eyes open, the more your eyes open, the more, like you're saying, capitalism is not cracked up to be. People say, why are you socialist? And why do you hate capitalism? I don't hate capitalism, right? Capitalism is the most, Marx said this, right? Capitalism is the most revolutionary economic system there's ever been, but it's doomed to fail. There's contradictions in it that will just unravel it eventually. So we have to get ready with a new system, a new way of distributing resources, opportunities, yada, yada, yada. I don't want to get into that. But you're a client. Your client, you're not your clients, but your firm's clients. Lockheed Martin. And I'm like, oh, John works for this law firm that Anheuser-Busch, formerly Starwood Hotels, Boeing.
Yeah.
How do you?
Diocese of Los Angeles, our Supreme Court case this week.
And as somebody who I always wanted to ask a lawyer this. Because I wanted to be a lawyer, right? I actually wanted to be a corporate lawyer for a bit in high school. I took AP Gov and Law, and that's when my favorite teacher was a lawyer. He was also a practicing lawyer. His dad was a district judge in Chicago. But so I was watching this interview with Judge Judy and Norm Macdonald. And she talks about there's a lot of wiggle room in the law, that the law is not itself is not just, but the law provides for wiggle room to, the judge has to, make it fit justice. So, I mean, how do you square? I saw you were involved in a Venetian case, right? Sheldon Adelson's company in '99.
Yes.
There were some protesters on a temporary walkway, and the Venetian was saying that's private property. You cannot demonstrate on this. And the National Labor Board was saying, well, no, you're violating labor laws. They have a right to free speech.
Right.
So I mean, how, as a lawyer, you're defending people, you're defending corporation businesses, but you're progressive. So how does that work in your head? I'm not judging anything.
No, no,
I'm
I know.
genuinely curious. Genuinely curious.
Yes. So, it's to answer it again, I have to go back to the proposition that I used to be more moderate. So when I started with my current firm for the first time in 1992, I was a typical Clinton Democrat at that time. Okay. And there are a lot of things about Clinton that I didn't like. I didn't like, Defensive Marriage Act. I thought that the crime bill, the three strikes, I thought that might be going a bit too far. I although I did for a time in that era even convert to supporting the death penalty, I've finally renounced it once and for all. But
So you were like, when you're saying a Clinton Democrat, can we say, especially in the '90s, law and order Democrat?
yeah, I would have called myself if you had wanted to put that label on me. I would have proudly worn it. I would have said, maybe a bit rough around the edges on some of the stuff. I never went for the super predator talk that Hillary spewed.
Right.
But again, I kind of thought,
and that's the thing. She was too smart to just be a gaffe. It's not a gaffe. She's very intelligent.
Well, part of the thing with Hillary Clinton too is that I think, she and Bill alike. I think a lot of it. I always thought, the maybe the stereotype of Hillary is that the Republicans thought that she was this wild-eyed liberal and that she was just masquerading as a moderate. And I think now you sort of have to admit that, no, she was the moderate all along.
She was on the board of Walmart. She was, yeah.
And she was a Goldwater girl.
Goldwater girl. Yeah.
I mean, that was Phyllis Schlafly's candidate. Come on. She did change, but
Right.
but that is her background. But I was, fully, proud Clinton supporter in those days. And, just to step back a little bit, we talked about how I think it's plausible that Billy pursued Mary Kay Letourneau, even though he's not responsible for the relationship because he's a minor.
Right.
But, we know for a fact that Monica Lewinsky pursued Bill Clinton.
Right.
That is a documented fact coming from Monica Lewinsky. That does not make Bill Clinton's conduct proper.
Right.
It means it's not sexual harassment, which is my area of the law, one of my areas, and it's it complicates things.
Yeah. Is there? As you're a labor and employment lawyer, so is there anything improper with how that relationship went down?
So, no and yes. No and yes. Legally, no. There was no legal impropriety in the relationship at all, which is why. The whole thing with the Paula Jones case was a setup because they really didn't have any business asking him about the relationship with Monica Lewinsky in the deposition because there was never an allegation that he had sexually harassed Monica Lewinsky. That was
not like when he was governor or district attorney or attorney general of Arkansas, where some woman, I think Jennifer Flowers or somebody said that he raped her in a hotel room in the early '80s.
So that was the rape allegation, which became public after I think the impeachment trial ended.
Right.
The rape allegation, though, date back to like 20 years earlier when he was attorney general. Who knows whether that really happened or not?
Right.
The thing that always got me with Clinton was that there was a can you top this aspect to all the revelations about him? Because the first revelation was he's a womanizer. The big bombshell, he had the affair with Jennifer Flowers. Okay, that was the first thing to hit the news. So he's a womanizer. We had not elected a president who was known to be a womanizer at the time. I mean, JFK, it kind of came out mostly afterwards and was just whispered about. There were a lot of womanizer presidents, but they weren't public about it. So, it was thought that was going to kill the campaign. It didn't. So then 2 years later, well, there's sexual harassment. Okay, well, that's bad. But, he didn't offensively touch her. He flashed his crooked penis, apparently, according to her. And who knows how consensual that was or was not. It was a one-time incident. It was a weak legal case that she had. And the conservative legal establishment was behind her in that case. I mean, that's public knowledge.
Yeah.
So that's worse than an affair. Okay. Well, then the Kathleen Willey thing comes out, and that's
What
not
was Kathleen Willey? I don't remember.
Kathleen Willey. I don't know. Remember why she was in the White House, but she was at the White House on one occasion, and apparently Clinton, like physically pressed her against the wall to kiss her or something. So that's like an example. It was a one-time incident, but it was physical touching. Yeah. So that's a worse incident than the Paula Jones incident. And then comes Juanita Broaddus with just the out-and-out rape allegation. So you see one worse than the other in this cascade of allegations.
Like somebody's trying to see what sticks to this president, what sticks to this man.
And we know, I mean, Hillary had the infamous line about there was a vast right-wing conspiracy. Well, there was. I mean, that is
Newt Gingrich was in Congress, right? Leading the Congress.
Yeah. I mean, they were absolutely trying to. Now, it doesn't mean they didn't have something, of merit in their allegations against him. But they, I think, damaged their own credibility with how they proceeded because they were too bloodthirsty against the guy. And it was obvious that they had ulterior motives. And so we'll never know about the truth of some of that stuff. I mean, my thinking is Clinton, is he capable of that stuff? Yes. I don't know if he did it, but he's capable of that. And, and Hillary, I think, was too supportive of him to the point of, being, I think, just so dismissive of the women. And,
well, it's like what you're saying. She's cutthroat and she's very ambitious. And she's like, what am I going to do? Divorce my president husband?
Right.
It would have ruined her name.
Yes. And I think, ultimately, all that was the seeds of her own destruction in 2016. All of that, I think, along with a ton of other stuff, Russia and whatnot, led to the absolute catastrophe that we're dealing with now. Yeah. But at the time, again, going back to my own personal involvement with this, I was on board with the Clintons. Now, when the Bill Clinton stuff came out in 1998, my position was he should resign, but he should not be impeached because what he committed was technically not perjury because I didn't think it was material to the underlying proceedings in the Paula Jones case. So I had a very legalistic defense to his perjury claim.
Yeah, he lied under sworn deposition that he didn't have sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky. That's all there. That's the perjury charge, right?
That's the perjury charge. And the fact of the matter is the full punishment that I think he was entitled to get and did get was that in that lawsuit of Paula Jones's, because he lied in the deposition, he was sanctioned by the judge several $100,000 for all their legal fees connected with that.
And he was disbarred, wasn't he?
He was disbarred. He agreed to the disbarment, but he was disbarred. So all that's appropriate. I just didn't think it was a crime, and I didn't think it was an impeachable offense.
And considering what we have now in the White House, perjury is, a day in the park.
God, it's just, the only reason that he's not perjured himself is because he's avoiding going under oath. I mean, the whole deposition of Clinton was a perjury trap. Their whole design was to catch him in perjury.
Which is why Trump is not giving a deposition, because he saw what happened to Clinton.
He's incapable of telling the truth. Yeah. Now, Clinton was kind of the opposite, where Clinton thought he could outsmart the whole process.
I think he had the highest IQ of any president, supposedly. Bill Clinton did.
Supposedly. I mean, he was the
Rhodes Scholar, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, he wasn't that smart, obviously, because he did get himself impeached by a very partisan Congress. Although I will say about Trump is the only person in the history of this country, the only president to ever have a member of his own party in the Senate vote to remove him from office. When Mitt Romney made that vote on one of the two counts, because 0 Democratic senators voted to convict Clinton in 1998, and 0 Democratic senators voted to convict Andrew Johnson in 1868. So, So Trump has that badge of shame. It really ought to be highlighted more. But there we have it.
Yeah.
So when I was doing this, a lot of people at my firm had very similar political views to mine at the time. Not too many of them now are as progressive as I am. Maybe a couple are, because I've kind of moved left. So my mindset was formed in a time where, basically my mind was, look, I think, and I still will say this, a lot of the best lawsuits against employers are those that are never filed. A lot of people with the most meritorious cases never file their cases.
What do you
I
mean by
know
that?
because a lot of people have had terrible things happen to them. People close to me have had sex discrimination and race discrimination visited upon them and would have had very ample grounds for lawsuits, but they did not file lawsuits. And the reason was, kind of, it's sort of like why Michelle Obama doesn't go into politics. They didn't have the stomach for what comes with. And, litigation is no day in the park. It is a pretty, contentious process.
Yeah.
So that's their reason for not filing lawsuits. It's not because they don't have cases. Whereas a lot of people who do file the lawsuits, some of them just frankly have a screw loose. Others of them, may have valid cases, but they don't have evidence. And some of them, just don't have good cases, and it's just they're going with their gut feeling that something bad happened, and it's probably because of some illegal reason, but the facts simply don't support them. And, just like criminals are entitled to a defense, I think employers are entitled to a defense.
I was going to say John Adams. I mean, people ask when the Boston Massacre happened, right? Those British soldiers killed 5 people, right? And John Adams defended them in court, and people were like, well, "You're a traitor! You're a traitor!" He goes, "No, I'm a patriot, and they have a right to trial by a fair trial."
Right. It didn't mean he supported the redcoats. I mean, it meant that he believed in the right to a fair trial. And
which I think is so interesting, because we're losing that principle now in society, where people think that the other side, the opposing side, isn't, because they're wrong in your mind, because they're in the wrong, they're either morally or legally wrong in your mind, they've abdicated all right to fairness or anything.
Exactly. And if you remember during the George W. Bush administration, how a lot of attorneys were, I think, persecuted unfairly because they were defending, terrorism suspects,
right,
in these cases, and they would try to accuse the attorneys themselves of basically complicity in terrorism. And look, I mean, I'm not naive enough to think that that is something that is impossible to happen, that kind of complicity. Right. I mean, there are mob attorneys who are sometimes complicit in mob activities. We've all seen that in the movies,
right?
And that's about as close as I have to personal knowledge on it. But the point being, though, that just because you represent somebody who either has, like, Sheldon Adelson, I probably agree with on less than 1% of things, at least. But I did believe in my client's case. I will admit that it made me very uncomfortable to see that John Lewis was on the opposite side of us on the protest march back in 1999.
Oh, really?
It was simply amazing. Yeah, no, he appeared at the march.
Oh, so how did that turn out? Because I was reading the opinion. Is that, it said Kavanaugh? That's not the same Kavanaugh, is it?
It is indeed. I argued in front of him. Yes.
Wow. I'm like, I saw Judge Kavanaugh, and I'm like, okay, I don't see Brett anywhere. It can't be the same I know Kavanaugh's a kind of common name, but I was like, what are the odds?
That was him.
Wow.
That was him. And I argued that case in Washington, D.C. in April of 2015. So that case, and there were so many legal detours that it took. So I'm just going to give you the 30,000 foot view and hope I don't get bogged down. So the march occurs in April of, I think it was April of 1999. It was before the Venetian opened. And at the time, it was weird because, they needed to widen Las Vegas Boulevard to accommodate the traffic that
they said that the Venetian being built was going to ruin traffic on the Strip. And so they widened the lanes, and they took away a sidewalk that they already had. So they built a temporary sidewalk in front of the Venetian.
Right, exactly. So, and at the time of the march, it wasn't even a temporary sidewalk. It was the asphalt on the street, but it was
marked out in orange or something like that, right?
Yeah. And so the Venetian's position is, this is our property, because union picketers have the right to protest, across the street or around the property. They don't have the right to just come on. Like they couldn't just like march through the lobby of the Venetian and do that. The
And,
law
and,
does not
and
allow
this
them.
is a good point to bring up because people wonder, like, they come to Vegas, they come to the Strip, and they say like, "Oh, you can drink outside. That's crazy, but you can only drink on the Strip." And the reason for that is because the sidewalk is private property. It's
Right.
owned. Every sidewalk that's in front of every casino is owned by that casino, which is why you can drink on the sidewalk because you're still on casino property.
And you know how you know that the sidewalk is private property now
Hmm.
is because it's of how it's tiled, or it's not just
Right. It's not regular sidewalk, right?
yeah. It's like and it is of a piece with the Venetian
Right.
itself.
Right.
I've only stayed there once, and they did pay for it. It's quite nice, but
They redid it too. They added so many buildings to it. It's probably one of my favorite. It's my favorite casino. It's the largest casino. The Venetian is tied to Palazzo, and
right.
they're technically the largest casino by rooms in the world.
And they're the biggest non-union employer in Las Vegas.
I can believe that. Sheldon Allison's the king of Vegas now. He owns a Review Journal. He owns everything.
And he hates unions. And but that's
Neither here nor there.
no. I'm not going to go down that road. But
Right.
but the property thing was a legitimate thing, and so there was actually two pieces of litigation that grew out of it. And so the one that we did not have involvement with it was over the property. Basically the property rights there, and there was an agreement, and that got litigated, and it was basically the question came down to. Well, I'm going to get bogged down in this. So
Yeah, they were using some kind of doctrine that I wasn't aware of that came from what? A Nader case? Was that right?
There might have been. I mean, you've probably heard of the thing like the company town and the public forum and that stuff. So those are like the First Amendment issues. So basically, there are no First Amendment rights as a general matter to protest on private property.
Yeah, you can't go to somebody's house and say whatever you want. They can ask you to leave.
Right. But there are some exceptions to that. One of them is like the company town. So there was a place in Alabama, I think, where they did that, where basically the town was owned by a company. And of course, I'm sure that there were racially discriminatory aspects to it, which don't show up in the printed court opinion. But what the court basically said is, look, even though this is technically private property because it's all privately owned, it has all the attributes of a public place. And so we're going to treat it like public. And so the First Amendment rights attach. And in the Venetian case that was brought, my old firm, actually, old Melvin E. Myers litigated it. The Ninth Circuit ended up ruling that this was close enough to the public, forum type situation. And I don't even remember all the legal details, and I won't bore you with them. It was a split decision 2-1, but they did say that the protesters had a right to be there. So they decided that for purposes of the protest, it was in essence public property, even though it really was the Venetians' private property. So then our piece of it was that the National Labor Relations Board brought the unfair labor practice that were, trying to chill the protest and there were three things that were done to try to stop the protest. One of them was to call the police and to ask them to arrest the protesters.
Right.
Another one of them was
which they wouldn't. The police said they wouldn't. Right? They said they would only be there to watch and to take care of public safety, but they weren't going to arrest anybody.
Right. And so so there was like a request beforehand. They're also on the bullhorn or the PA or whatever.
Right.
Somebody from Venetian read a message say, "You are trespassing on private property, blah blah blah." And then when they were there, the Venetian official tried to get the police officer to make the Venetian. Actually, no, it wasn't when they were there. It was afterwards. The Venetian official went to the police to try to make a citizen's arrest.
Yeah.
citizens arrest is kind of it's different than what I'm used to seeing on TV. On TV, you kind of think of like the citizen actually puts you in handcuffs and takes you away, but in reality, it's more that the citizen sort of catches you in the act, and then they go to the police. And
so they wanted to do a citizen's arrest after the fact, after everybody had gone.
Yes, and they knew that wasn't going to work. The reason they did it, it was all part of a legal strategy.
Building
now,
a
that's
case.
something I couldn't say in public knowledge. Yes, right. Because this was part of our defense to the unfair labor practice charge, was that in our view, by taking these steps, the Venetian was trying to improve its position in the property rights case that was going on simultaneous to this.
Because they let the demonstration go on anyway, and they're arguing something after the fact. Their property rights after the fact.
And they're fighting for their property rights basically, and they're saying, this is what we're doing, and therefore it's protected under a particular doctrine that under the First Amendment that you can, as long as it's the right to petition basically the government for redress of grievances. That's a clause in the First Amendment that's there alongside the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion.
Right.
The most obvious part of the right to petition is to file a lawsuit. That's a First Amendment right that you actually have. And of course, subject to some restrictions, you can't just get away with frivolous lawsuits with impunity, but you can file a lawsuit.
So that's what the Venetian was doing, filing a petition for redress of grievances, saying, hey, these guys violated my property rights.
And the National Labor Relations Board, not being First Amendment lawyers, just completely brushed it aside and found that there was an unfair labor practice. So we petitioned that for review from the DC Circuit. And it ended up getting split into two different trips to the DC Circuit, because our argument the first time was that the stuff that we did, some of it was basically incident to the petition that we would be filing the lawsuit. It was part of like the setup for the lawsuit. And our panel in that case, believe it or not, had Merrick Garland on it. Merrick Garland, of course, was President Obama's pick for the DC Circuit, who got blocked by Moscow.
So in one case, you're dealing with a future Supreme Court nominee.
Yes.
And a future Supreme Court justice.
Exactly.
The guy who took his spot, basically.
Yes. And in the same case.
Yeah.
And so I think this was the case that Garland was on, because I've had a few other DC Circuit cases and some other ones for the Venetian too. Well, they were really two different cases, but this case, so they disagreed with us on that and said, no, that's not incident. You're taking this too far. This is a valid unfair labor practice. But then the other argument that we made, and I'll give myself credit, I came up with it. This is the argument that when we made the citizen's arrest attempt, that wasn't just incident to the lawsuit. That was a direct petitioning activity. We're petitioning the police.
Because you guys went to the police. You guys didn't grab anybody. They didn't grab anybody. They went to the police.
Right.
Yeah.
And we said
the police are government. The police are government.
And basically what the first panel did where we lost was say, well, we're not so sure about that, so we're going to send it back to the NLRB to review. And then that took forever because of a whole bunch of other issues. And eventually the NLRB ruled against us. And so then we took that back to the DC Circuit because, Sheldon Adelson is not a fan of unions and he was not just going to take this lying down. So we took this up. And that was where, I got to argue in front of Judge Kavanaugh. He was the head of the 3-judge panel. And interestingly enough, one of the other judges on the panel was a now retired judge named Janice Rogers Brown, who about 11 years before that, I had argued in front of when she was a justice on the California Supreme Court. I've only argued one case in that court, and she was on that case. So I've argued in front of her on both coasts. And
the law, or at least your part of it, seems like a small world.
It really is. It's smaller than you would think. And so, and this argument really was kind of a day at the beach. The panel, and especially Judge Kavanaugh, were completely on our side, and they wrote the opinion siding with us that this was protected petitioning activity, going directly to the government to petition for redress of grievances. You know, some
Yeah.
people will say, well, that's a bad decision because now what? That means that the anytime we protest, you can just sick the cops on us, and that's protected. Well,
That's not what that means, though, right? That's not what that means. The
why?
decision means that.
No, because what you can't do, and the thing that we made very clear is that you can't have a frivolous
Right.
request for arrest. So if I'm just going to like trump up something on you and make it up, that's not protected. That's not protected petitioning. That's frivolous. You know, you can get sanctioned for filing a frivolous lawsuit, and you can suffer some sort of sanction like an unfair labor practice if you make up a bogus charge to ask the police to arrest someone.
Yeah.
So it's really not as extreme as one might make it sound.
Right.
So, you know, going back to the how do I balance it? Well, I look at the results of some of these cases, and, you know, first of all, I think it's better to have them in my hands. You know, I'm not some right-wing activist.
I was gonna say, like, it actually encourages me to know that, if I had looked up your law firm and I would have thought, oh, all those lawyers are right wing assholes, pro capitalist, defending capitalism to the death. It encourages me to know that there are people in law firms that not knowing, you would think that they're conservative, but no, there's diversity everywhere. There's diversity of opinion, of principles, of politics, of principles.
Yeah, no, there really are. I mean, few people at the firm voted for Trump. Many didn't, and there are some Republicans there who didn't. I mean, I of the Republicans I know, I would actually say that probably more than half of them are more Lincoln Project Republicans than Trump Republicans. Now that we have a handy name for them.
Yeah.
So, and definitely we have sympathies for the employer, obviously, because that is who we defend. But not all employers are created equal. You listed some of the big companies that I've represented. I also represent the County of Los Angeles. I represent the Los Angeles Unified School Board.
There you go.
And I've represented some nonprofits here and there. And look,
I wanted to bring that up because people are so quick to judge now, and I'm always pleading for nuance. Look into it. Don't just look at a distance and make a decision.
Right.
And that's why I actually love that you got into the weeds with this Venetian case because, you see the Venetian on one side and you see the National Labor Relations Board on the other. And most people, if you're progressive, you're going with the National Labor. But you're saying the Venetian, from what you explained to me, the Venetian had a genuine gripe.
No, it did have a genuine gripe, at least on the one narrow issue. I think they had a legitimate position on the issues that the DC Circuit disagreed with us on. And, I think the DC Circuit got it wrong in that case. Yeah. But I could see where they were coming from. That case, I think the second one, the one where Kavanaugh ruled for us, that was a much easier case for the DC Circuit to rule in our favor. Yeah. So, I don't feel that bad that we lost that one. I won another one just last year in front of the DC Circuit, where we represented a nursing home up in Redding, California, and they fired a nurse's aide or certified nursing assistant. I mean, she was someone who was basically what happened was the reason she was fired was for elder abuse.
I worked in a nursing home. I worked closely with CNAs. I did activities. I worked in an Alzheimer's ward for like 2 years. And so I worked closely with CNAs. I dated a few CNAs.
Wow. Bless your heart. Because I could not do work like that.
Yeah.
I'm not built that way. And so it's wonderful that you do. And this person was, a loving caregiver. She was a wonderful person. Everybody had nothing but good things to say about her.
Right.
And she slipped just once. But what happened was she was at a doctor's office. She had taken her patient, riddled with Alzheimer's or dementia, completely out of it. And, almost a touch of the Tourette's where she just keeps cussing. And
That's a lot of that. Yeah.
yeah.
This girl was
And,
one older woman. She was 99. Her name was Goldie. I loved her. She was my favorite. We talked all the time. But yeah, she would lift up her shirt in the elevator and flash visitors, flash me. Say inappropriate things. She was gone. But she didn't mean any harm by it.
No. And so this nurse's aide, is so, patient with this woman, but she apparently cracked at one point and just blurted out, "You better knock it off or I'll kick your ass." You can't say that to a patient.
Yeah.
And it got called in. Nobody saw her do it, but three people in the receptionist area, the doctor's office, who were not employees of our client, which was key. These neutral people called in and said, "Look, one of your nurses, screamed this at our patient as they were there." And they did the investigation and concluded that this happened, and she got terminated. Well, she claimed it was because of her union activities, and it goes in front. That type of case, you have an administrative law judge try the case. There's a 4-day trial up in Reading. During the trial, by the way, there was a partner and associate who were trying the case, and during the trial, the associate basically bugs out, leaves the firm, leaving the partner in a trial by himself, which was just
And the thing I'll say about that is that, people don't realize that working in a nursing home, a lot of people, I worked in a nursing home that was $5,000 a month. So it's pretty good. It's pretty high class nursing home.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of people, it's sad to say, working there for 2 years, I know how it works. A lot of people dump their elderly relatives there thinking that they're going to die in a month, 2 months, 6 months. And then when they don't die after 2 years, you don't see the family ever. You don't ever see maybe you see them. The good relatives come every Sunday, but sometimes you don't even see them on the resident's birthday. And so these CNAs are their family, their friends. They're dealing with them every day. So there is a familiarity between them, right? Residents swear at you, you swear at them, but it's like a familiarity. It's and so somebody who's visiting would be like, "Oh my God, a nurse is talking to a resident like that," not knowing what goes on in a nursing home. That's a community.
Well, here's the funny thing. So this patient in our case, she did have loving and caring family. And her daughter, I think, came to the hospital, or not the hospital, the doctor's office at the time that the mother is there. She completely defended the CNA. She said, "The CNA is the most wonderful person in the world. She treats my mother with the utmost respect and care. And this completely sounds like something my mother would have said, not the CNA.
Right.
I don't believe it for a minute."
Right.
My feeling about that was, I think she's like 99.9% correct, except that I think that in this instance, it's basically because we have neutral witness accounts and they have no motive to lie. And they could tell the reason, the persuasive thing was that they heard two voices and they were very familiar with the patient's voice. And so that's how they knew, because they were familiar with the one voice and there was a second one and they knew it was the other one, was the assistant.
No, I'm saying I don't doubt she said that to the resident. I've heard the same thing from CNAs, right?
I think the reason she did was because she'd been hearing it and it just came out of her mouth instead of the other ones. I think that's what happened.
But do CNAs abuse? There's people, CNAs that abuse, right? But when we're talking about CNAs, we're talking about somebody who cleans your mom or dad, wipes their ass, brushes their teeth, cuts their nails, cuts their toenails. They're not abused. Do they sometimes swear? They get sweared at. There's a lot of swear words flying around in a nursing home. You'd have no idea.
Yeah, and the problem with this one, the reason she got terminated, they're like, "Look, we don't want to terminate her. She's great." They also know, look, she's a big union activist, and if we fire her, we're asking for trouble. But we have California has mandatory reporting laws,
right,
for abuse, elder abuse, and other abuse, and we have a zero tolerance policy. We also, the union had just signed they had just been recognized as the collective bargaining agent, but they didn't have a contract yet. And so there was no progressive discipline. So, and this was a zero tolerance where they basically say, for a first strike, you can get terminated because this is abuse. And it was a threat of violence. I mean, she didn't really
Yeah.
mean it, but you can't even say it.
Right.
And so they're like, we got no choice. I mean, they were tortured by this. These
Right.
were people that were out to just stick it to the union.
Well, that's what I was saying. Like, there's the law, and then there's justice, and they don't always line up. And it's tough, when it's good to know that, as a progressive, you're a lawyer, so you believe in doing your job well. You're going to apply the law to the best of your ability to defend your client. That's your job, right? And to not do your job, I should say, and I'm not sticking up for lawyers, but to do your job to the best of your ability is everybody's moral obligation. Do your job to the best of your ability.
Yes.
But you're progressive, so you're also voting for people who will change the laws, reform them, make them more fair. So I think people listening to this, I have a better understanding for lawyers. I might have said back in the day, I'd never want to be a lawyer because I don't want to be a master of bullshit. But there's just that culture of anti-lawyer. That goes back far, right? I was reading about ancient Greece, the sophists, right? They were basically the first lawyers. People don't trust somebody who can argue two sides of every debate. But that's such a great skill to have.
Yeah, and I think it makes me a more effective lawyer that I really can argue the progressive side of it. And,
it's reassuring, again, as a layperson, that I might be in front of some, hotshot lawyer who's defending an employer against me, but at least I'll know now, like, oh, he might understand, like, because it's tough to be in that position as a layperson and think like, this lawyer is out to get me, doesn't even understand where I'm coming from, and that's scary as somebody who's not trained in law. And so you're giving me and I guess other people confidence that no, lawyers, they're doing their job and they're good people, and don't be mad at the lawyer. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Don't be mad at the lawyer, hate the law, right? Change the law.
And look, you can sometimes hate the lawyer as much as the game,
right? Of course, that's my point too, right? There's some lawyers who are assholes apparently, and there's some lawyers who are not assholes like yourself.
I've had cases where I got into political arguments with the plaintiffs' lawyers because I was taking the progressive side and they were taking the Republican
in the
side.
courtrum.
No, outside.
Oh no, I'm about to say that'd have been a crazy circus, man.
Yeah, but outside, talking with them, they're like, they say they're defending justice, and then on the other side, they're like, Trump 2020 and that nonsense.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, you never know. And one other reason that I haven't gotten to in terms of why I represent the employers as opposed to the employees, there's like some personality traits that go into this too. And one of them is income security. Plaintiffs lawyers, they're kind of like Hollywood stars in the sense that they can make enormous amounts of money if they hit a big verdict, for example. But it's not a steady stream necessarily. It's hit and miss. You may get a big verdict and then you may go for a year or two without getting anything. But of course you have enough to live off of if you make a big verdict. But I've always been a little gun shy about that, coming from a family where, I grew up in the 70s and we did have big recessions at that time. I think I went through 3 before I even started high school.
Right.
And so I was always worried about that stuff. And, that's one thing I think that my particular generation has in common with some of the younger kids who have now this is their second economic calamity in only a dozen years. So I want to have like at least a floor of income. It's not like I got a lot of money from my family or anything like that. Basically, you're looking at it, and I'm the source of income. So it's just easier for me. The other thing too is that corporate clients are usually easier to deal with because a lot of times you're talking with in-house counsel or sophisticated business people. If you're representing plaintiffs, you're dealing with the individual, and they may have very compelling cases, but they also can be very difficult to deal with just from a personality standpoint. and they can be very just demanding and expect your phone to be like the bat phone, and you're going to answer it at all hours, and all you're doing is focusing on their case because they don't have a realistic idea of what you do, and that your case is actually one of many cases, and you can't just spend every waking hour on their case.
Right.
I also like to leave my work at home. Well, I'm working at home now, so it's kind of hard. But not take it home with me, but I like to leave it at the office.
Right.
And I like to just and I will turn it off. And I will generally not, unless it's a important email usually from a partner. I generally will not even answer work emails after hours or on the weekends. I've just made that a flat policy. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I don't want to have all my time taken up. And because I want to have a nice work-life balance. And frankly, being a defense attorney facilitates that more. I also am more comfortable defending people than prosecuting, I think. That's just a mentality. It's a psychological thing. So it's just easier. I could certainly see myself taking the pro bono case, at some point on some of these issues, not necessarily employment, because I do have some background on some stuff that's not necessarily related to employment, like the Supreme Court case that we won this week, the Our Lady of Guadalupe case. That is an employment case, but it really...
What was that?
Oh, so that was a case that just got decided Wednesday. It was not talked about as much as the other case that got decided Wednesday, which was the contraceptive coverage under Obamacare. But it was another religious case. So what happened was, our client is Our Lady of Guadalupe School, which is a Catholic elementary school down in Redondo Beach. And they terminated a teacher. And basically the reason they had was because she was having a problem with the reading program that the school was trying to develop. And she claimed it was because of her age. So she sued for age discrimination. But what the school did was file a motion for summary judgment to get rid of the case before trial. And the grounds was something called the Ministerial Exception. So there's a doctrine in the law that basically says that if you qualify as, and this is a term of art, a minister, then the employment laws basically don't pertain to you. So for example, the easy example is that a woman cannot sue the Catholic Church because they won't make her a priest. Is that just sex discrimination? Of course. Is it stupid? I think it is. I don't believe that. I think they should have women priests, gay priests, married priests, in my opinion. But I'm not the Catholic Church. I don't get to decide.
We had this AP Gov case. I think that's where I learned it. Is it true that, like, say there's a restaurant and their whole image is that they have all male waiters? That's their whole brand. That they don't have to hire a female waitress.
Oh, yes, they do have to hire one.
Oh, okay.
There have been businesses that have tried that, and at least
you know what I mean, though, right? There's restaurants or some kind of where they need a certain look, or it's all men. That's their brand, all men waiters.
No,
no.
Because I don't think you can do that, because I'm pretty sure, I know in California you can't. I'm pretty sure even nationwide you can't.
How about denying ugly people entry to a club? Because there's a club famously in Chicago called the Underground.
Right.
Vince Vaughn and people go there, and they won't let you in if you're an ugly girl, unless you're with a lot of pretty girls. I knew a girl who, she's like, she tried to sneak in by saying she had to go to the bathroom, and the bouncer followed her to the bathroom and then escorted her out. But let her friends stay because her friends were hot.
So there's two different things with that. So if it's a truly private club, if it's not what would be considered a public accommodation, then, there's certain private associations that can do that sort of thing. This doesn't sound like that. So I'm going to assume it's not, and that they're covered by the laws. So then the next question I have is, does the no uglies apply to men as well as women, or is it just the women? I mean, do they have guys that look like, gargoyles coming in there? And it's just
I think they're trying to attract rich men like Vince Vaughn's is. So they want a club with young hot women.
And therefore, a lot of those rich men are ugly rich men.
Right.
So I'm assuming they don't have that policy. Well, that policy would be illegal, at least in California.
Ooh.
Oh yeah.
I just put Chicago on notice. Everybody in Chicago knows what club I'm talking about. So,
Well, so as a fellow Cubs fan, now see, I moved to California in 1986, so I don't even know if this was around when you were a kid. But do you remember that at Wrigley Field they used to have something called Ladies' Day?
no.
So Friday was Ladies' Day at Wrigley Field, and the women could get in at I think it was a discounted price. I don't think they could get in free, but they could get in at a discounted price. And I remember, watching the Cubs games in the 70s at least. I remember Jack Brickhouse was the announcer then, and Friday Ladies' Day at Wrigley Field, they play the Pirates or whoever, and that was.
But isn't that discrimination? Because they still have Ladies' Day at every club. Ladies free before 12, right? That's at every club every weekend.
In California, you cannot have that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's common practice in Chicago at so many clubs.
We litigated cases like that for there was a ski resort that somehow Anheuser-Busch got roped into the lawsuit because they were like helping sponsor the event. And I think it was so they couldn't do the Ladies' Day. So instead they did, it was age based, where it was like if you're over 21, if you were under, something like that. There was an age related event and they got sued. It was a class action lawsuit and we ended up winning, but I don't remember all the details there, but yeah, I mean, a lot of that stuff that you hear about and you see a lot of the time, a lot of that stuff's illegal. And I
That's
think
crazy, because that's everywhere in Chicago. When I tell you everybody, we grew up knowing it. Okay, ladies free, ladies will try to get ready really fast and try to get there before midnight because it's free cover. Men have to pay no matter what. Right.
Now, the easy case is the women don't pay and the men do. That's the easy case. That's illegal.
Wow. Everybody in Chicago's like, their ears are burning right now.
Illinois law, I can't speak to.
Right.
And I'm not even an expert on the federal law, although I would think that it would be illegal, but maybe it doesn't cover it. All I know is that if there is a law in your area that has prohibits sex discrimination in public accommodations, which is a legal term of art, then that is illegal. If it's the flat, like men get the price discount and the women don't.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And then the ugly women don't get in, but the hotties do. I believe that's also going to be illegal. Now, I could probably get some fight back from that, but I think that my argument would prevail on that, and then that would also be ruled illegal. In fact, I really have no doubt on it that it would be ruled illegal.
Yeah.
And a lot of the same rationale, and this is why this is such a groundbreaking case, that of all people, Justice Gorsuch wrote, the stolen seat justice, appointed by Trump, wrote the very pro result for the LGBT community and construing the Title VII law, because Title VII says nothing about sexual orientation or gender identity, but it says you can't discriminate in employment based on sex. And the rationale that Justice Gorsuch used was that, look, if you are discriminating, he basically used some examples. So let's take, two people, you and a woman are both attracted to the same woman. And it is not held against you, but it is held against the woman who's attracted to the same woman. And the defense would be, well, no, that's sexual orientation. It's because she's a lesbian and you're a straight male, which is true. And that may be the motivation of the animus in terms of, it may be more the anti-gay, a sin against God, blah, blah, blah.
But what if all three are bisexual?
Well, let's get to the bisexual case later. Although I think that is, that's an interesting fact pattern. He didn't address bisexuals. He addressed gay people and he addressed transgender people. So in the lesbian hypothetical that I gave you, The difference is that you, Hector, are allowed to be attracted to a woman because you're a man. And Sophia, or whoever the woman is, can't be because she's a woman. And we don't want a woman attracted to a woman. We want a man to be attracted to a woman. So therefore, if Sophia was a bisexual instead of a lesbian, it would be the same result. It wouldn't matter that Sophia may also be attracted to Hector. It wouldn't matter. It would only matter that they're both attracted to the same woman, and that's bad. And with the transgender issue, so let's say it's Hector and Sam, but Sam was identified as a woman at birth, but now identifies as a man, and you're the same in every other way, and then, but you're treated more favorably, even though you both identify as men, because you are biologically male and Sam was not that way at birth, and therefore they discriminated against Sam. And the rationale is that is sex discrimination. You are making judgments and choices based on sex, and that's illegal. And that's the way that I have always thought that the law should look at gender sex discrimination. The law did not for years. They went through a lot of contortions to basically say, no, that's sexual orientation. No, that's transgender discrimination. It's not sex. Come on. And they're not completely wrong, but the fact is there is still a sex-based distinction that you are intentionally making. You may not be conscious of it, but you're intentionally making it. And you're breaking the law. And they finally got it right. And full circle a bit, who sort of was making that argument in the 70s was none other than Phyllis Schlafly. Those were the arguments that Phyllis Schlafly was making against the Equal Rights Amendment in the 70s. She was saying, if you have this amendment passed, then you're going to have same-sex bathrooms, homosexuals are going to, have these rights. But she was making those arguments. And, that Phyllis Schlafly didn't get cited in the Supreme Court opinion, but some of the other ERA opponents' arguments did. And Alito brushed that off as just absolute nonsense. But that was an animating part of the opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment. And so you just got to open up your mind.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's a lot of controversy. I mean, I didn't think, I was like, okay, what am I going to talk to John about for, and look, we could talk forever. I've taken up 2 hours of your time. But yeah, I mean, me and my wife have been arguing about abortion. I'm for a woman's right to choose, but my whole argument is, when does a life become a life? We don't know.
Oh yeah.
We don't know. I'm not even let's not even bring that up, but we don't know when a life becomes a life, right? And so when people are saying you're killing babies, and I say we're not, well, how do I know? And how do they know I'm killing babies? Like, that's a gray line, right? And to bring it full circle again, when they were when they were in the Senate, it's tried in the Senate, right? Impeachment is tried in the Senate.
Right.
When the Senate was voting for impeachment, right when they were voting for impeachment against Bill Clinton, I was an 8th grade student, and I was in Washington, D.C. on my 8th grade trip, and we were standing outside the Congress watching the impeachment vote on the TV.
God.
Full circle, right? Full circle.
Were you watching the Senate trial or the House vote?
The House vote. The House votes?
The House,
no, Senate votes, right?
They both vote. So the House. So the way that it works is, it's the impeachment is really.
The House brings it up, right? The articles of impeachment.
Yeah, the House brings up articles of impeachment. It is somewhat similar to an indictment. It's not exactly the same, but it's closer to an indictment.
Charging somebody of something.
Yes. And so that has to pass on a majority vote of the House of Representatives. And there were 4 articles of impeachment that were brought to the House floor against Bill Clinton. 2 of them passed, 2 of them failed. So the two that failed are gone. The 2 that pass go to the U.S. Senate. And then the Senate conducts a trial, although, as we saw with Trump and even as we saw with Clinton, it wasn't really a full-fledged trial, although the Clinton trial actually had live witnesses, and the Senate trial was a Moscow Mitch sham and did not. But it was just lawyers arguing in the Trump trial, whereas the Clinton trial, they had some witnesses, And they also played testimony as they did in the Trump trial. But then the Senate votes convict, or not.
That's what I was watching.
Okay, so that's the convictor.
I was watching the moment of truth. I remember we were all watching the moment of truth.
So yours would have been in like January, February of 1990.
February.
Yeah, because I think February 12th was the day that the final judgment came down, and we all knew what was going to happen. We all knew, and simple math tells you what's going to happen, because you need 2/3 of the Senate to convict.
Right.
So you need 67 out of 100. There were 50 votes to convict on one count and only 45 votes to convict on the other. So there was no majority on either one.
Right.
And with the Trump, one of them ended at 53-47, the other 52-48. But of course, the difference was that the 53-47 was 100% party line on both sides. No Democrat voted to convict. No Democrat voted to acquit Trump. They all voted to convict. And all Republicans voted to acquit on one count, but Romney broke and voted to convict on one. And again, that's the only member of a president's party who's ever voted to convict. With Clinton, every vote to convict was a Republican. And there were some Republicans who voted to acquit on both. Every Democrat voted to acquit on both, but the Republicans had the majority. And that's why it was 50-50. And then one of them was 45-55. We were talking about abortion when you started to talk about the impeachment. I wanted to
go ahead. Kanye West had posted a picture of a 6-month fetus,
mm-hmm.
and there was my wife believes in a woman's right to choose, right?
Yes.
But I was just saying, and obviously he posted that to rile up the anti-abortion, because he's against abortion, Kanye West.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's a clever thing to post, that 6 months fetus, because that's where people are like, okay, when is a baby a baby, and when does I agree, a woman has a right to choose what happens with her body, right? But then I was like, okay, does a woman have a right to choose a 1-day-old newborn? No, right?
No.
Does a mother have a right to kill an 8-month pregnancy if it's viable? No, right? I mean, for me, it's like, okay, there's preemies that come out at 6 months and they live and they become successful people, right? Fully functioning. So obviously that's a viable life. So there's a gray line. When does life become viable in a woman's womb? And when does that, once it's viable, then it has rights. It has human rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
So I agree with you completely. This is the saying, this is back when I kind of considered myself a quintessential moderate. I don't anymore, but I haven't lost every vestige of that. And
right.
On abortion, this is what I have something to say to both sides on it. For the pro-choice side, I say that what you have to recognize is that any abortion, even if it's at 1 day or 1 week of the pregnancy, any abortion is the taking of a human life. That is a fact. Even if it's
I wouldn't agree with you there, but go ahead.
But then you got to listen to the other side. I would say to what so-called pro-life people, because a lot of them are pro-life until birth, right?
Right. Pro-pregnancy.
Yeah. I say there is the level of government intrusion that is involved in policing a woman's decision whether or not to have abortion has absolutely no counterpart when it comes to men. It is a far greater level of intrusion on a woman's body than the government ever imposes on men. And in fact, it's about as big of an intrusion as the government ever makes in any situation. So, a lot of people don't like balancing tests, but frankly, that's what you have to have here. You have to have a balance. There's a human life and there's the woman's right to a bodily autonomy.
Right.
And I I consider myself pro-choice. I mean, pro-choice and pro-life are not great labels, especially with all the hypocrisy that goes with pro-life, but we'll use them for ease of discussion. So I consider myself fully pro-choice. My belief is that there is some point, I'm not 100% sure where it is, although I would say your 6-month fetus probably fits this. There is some point where society is justified in saying to the woman, you've made your choice. You've chosen life, and we're going to protect life.
Same thing with the mother who has a 5-day newborn, right?
Oh, yeah.
You can't kill it because you've made your choice.
Well, and
or if you don't want it, give it to somebody else, but you can't kill it.
You can't kill it. No, you can't kill it. You can't kill it when it comes out of the womb.
Right.
You know, the Dr. Gosnell, the one in Pennsylvania who was convicted of murder because he was doing this. They were basically what they would call the partial birth abortions, where you're actually giving birth to live babies.
Yeah, that's terrible. Well, that's terrible.
Yeah, and he was convicted, and he's in murder. I mean, he's in prison for murder. And the Republicans point to that case, and I'm like, actually, what you're pointing to is a case where the current system worked just fine. The current system, I mean, the most pro-choice woman in the world is not going to go defend Dr. Gosnell for killing babies, actual live babies. So what we have to do is decide where to go on it. And, Justice Blackmun's decision in Roe versus Wade has been roundly criticized in legal circles. And one of the biggest critics, interestingly enough, had been Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she was an attorney before she got on the Supreme Court. Now, she always favored the result in Roe, but she thought the legal reasoning was very weak. And I think she has a point on that. I'm not talking about the legal reasoning so much. I'm talking about the policy. I think that from a policy standpoint, Justice Blackmun was very much on the right track, because he's the one who came up with the trimester system. The first trimester, pretty much, the government, it has to be hands off. Then the second trimester, the government has a heightened interest, and then
that's the gray zone, yeah. And the third trimester, I think most people are agreed, that's a baby. It's coming.
Yeah, that's a baby, and that's where I say the woman has made her choice. At that point, once you get to the third trimester, you made the choice. The second,
I agree.
That's the gray zone.
I agree.
We don't know where it is. So, because like you, even a very open-minded guy, you got startled when I said that I think that it's a life at birth.
Well, let me just say this, and people who know me know this. I had an abortion when I was a freshman in college. We had it right before the third month, in the first trimester, right before it ended. And but look how life works out. Now I have a stepdaughter, and she was born within months of when my baby would have been born. The baby would have been born. So the universe came back to me and gave me what I decided, what I chose against. Isn't that crazy?
It's so hard. I mean, my sister had her first son was born out of wedlock. And I remember talking to my mom and my sister about it, and they were very much of a piece. My mom was a much better Catholic than any of her kids became. But the feeling there, again, I mean, but she was also at heart a feminist. And the feeling is, I would never choose to have an abortion. This is coming from both of them. They never would have made that choice themselves, but they would fight to preserve the choice for other women.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pro-choice, but I'm not like, yay, I'm not one of these people who take it too far. We're like, abortion, I'm gonna have sex all weekend and have my abortion on Monday. Come on, you're
and
let's
most
not treat
women
it like that.
That is a fringe. That really is a fringe.
Right.
And the problem is, right wingers use that to try to paint everybody. And look, sometimes our position ends up helping the people of that mentality. Right. And you know what? You're always going to have some garbage that comes in. No side is pure. But,
we've been talking for a long time. My stepdaughter just came. We're adopting a cat today, so she's like, we need to go. Thank you so much. How do you say your last name, John? Manier. Oh, okay. Pinky up. Oui. John Manier. I mean, it's been a pleasure. I mean, we'll be talking on social media. Let people know how they can find you on social media.
So I am Twitter at John Manier, full name, JohnManier. I'm on Facebook, although most of my posts are only to friends. So that's really, Twitter is where my most public social media presence. LinkedIn too. But my views are my own. I don't talk for my
Oh yeah.
firm. I don't think you know them. I'm here now, and
Yeah.
only speak for myself. And
No, this was really fun, man. I hope I can invite you back on. I'm sure we're gonna have things to talk about. I mean, I think we could have talked all afternoon into the evening today.
easily, it's way past my lunchtime. I'm not even hungry. So
Right. I mean, I was thinking like, yeah, we're gonna fill the hour, but I could have gone all afternoon, man. It's been a pleasure talking to you finally.
yes, you do.
That's one of the best parts of this podcast. I get to actually meet people, talk to them face to face that I'm interacting with on social media.
My Apple Watch has given me 2 stand-up alerts during this.
My back is giving me a stand-up alert. Yeah,
my
thank you
heart,
so.
I have the same issue. So
Yeah. Well, I made my choice, like you said, to become a writer and sit at my desk all day.
you're doing very, very, very well. So you chose wisely.
Thank you so much. And again, I have to invite you back on. I'm gonna have to invite you back on. I mean, this was such a great conversation, and I think, yeah, you're a lawyer people can trust. So I mean, people want to see that. They want to see that. Thank you so much, and have a good weekend, man.
You too. We'll be in touch, and we'll have to see each other when I'm there or you're here.
Yeah, I'm trying to go out to California. I love it out there, especially the Valley. I love the Valley. I don't know why people shit on the Valley. I love the Valley.
I wish it's gonna rocket up to like the 90s and hundreds. That's when I don't like it. Otherwise, it's great.
Well, it's 100, about to be 120 here this month. So count your blessings, man. Take it easy, man.
Sure. Take care, Hector.
Peace.
Alrighty.